How often do we trust people we just met? What makes someone feel safe in a crowded room? And how quickly can an ordinary night take a turn no one expects? It started like many weekends do. Two close friends planned a simple night out. Music, conversation, a break from routine. Nothing felt risky, nothing felt unusual. Both women were thoughtful and careful by nature. They worked hard, they supported each other. Going out together was their way of staying connected in a busy city. They were not chasing trouble. They were chasing a moment of joy. The evening began in a familiar social space, a place where people gather to relax and unwind. Later, they decided to continue the night somewhere livelier, a private party known for music and creative energy. To outsiders, it might seem uncertain. To locals, it felt normal. Inside, the atmosphere was loud but controlled. Lights were low. Music filled the air. People moved in groups, laughing and talking. The friends stayed close to each other. They chose an area that felt more comfortable than the crowd. That is where they met three men. The introduction felt casual. Nothing about the moment raised alarms. The men appeared confident and familiar with the space. They spoke easily. They blended in. Trust often forms in small ways. A shared laugh, a confident tone, the feeling that someone belongs where they are. As the night went on, conversations continued. Time passed without notice. The group decided to leave together. It did not feel like a major decision at the time, just a continuation of the evening. Security cameras later showed them exiting calmly. No rushing, no signs of concern. 5 people walking into the quiet early hours. What happens after that is where questions begin. A short time later, the mood changed. One of the women sensed discomfort, not panic, just a quiet feeling that something was off. She sent a message to her friend, simple words. A shared understanding. They wanted to leave. Plans were made to get out safely. Transportation was arranged. They were thinking clearly. They were ready to go, but they never made it outside. Minutes passed, then more time. The ride waited, then left. No one came down. What caused that delay? Why didn't they reach the door? Hours later, families would start asking questions. Messages went unanswered. Locations did not make sense. Worry grew slowly, then all at once. By the time authorities became involved, the night was no longer just a night out. It had become an investigation. This case would raise difficult questions about trust, about social spaces, about how easily danger can hide behind confidence, and it would reveal how small choices made in ordinary moments can carry heavy consequences. But this was only the beginning, because what investigators uncovered next would change how this night was understood forever. If the warning signs appeared early, why were they so easy to miss? And who else had crossed paths with the same danger before? When does concern turn into fear? How long is too long to wait before asking for help? And what happens when silence fills the space where answers should be? By the next morning, worry had spread beyond unanswered messages. Family members noticed something was wrong. Phones stayed quiet. Locations on tracking apps did not match familiar places. Small details began to feel heavy. One partner noticed a sudden location change. Not a home, not a friend's place, a medical center. That single update changed everything. Calls were made immediately. Voices on the other end sounded careful, uncertain. Within minutes, the truth arrived in pieces. One woman had been brought in without identification. She had not survived. Shock does not arrive loudly. It settles in slowly. Disbelief first, then a deep, hollow quiet. While one family was processing the unthinkable, another was still waiting. A second woman had been taken to a different hospital. She was alive, but barely. Doctors worked while answers remained unclear. The questions were the same for everyone. What happened after they left the party? Why were they separated? And who brought them there? Hospital staff shared details that immediately stood out. 2 men arrived. They wore coverings. They did not stay. They gave a vague explanation and disappeared. This was not how emergencies usually looked. Investigators took notice. Medical reports revealed reactions that did not align with personal habits. Friends and family were certain of that. These women were cautious. They knew their limits. Nothing about this situation fit who they were. As hours turned into days, the second woman remained unresponsive. Her family traveled urgently, holding on to hope. They spoke to her, held her hand, promised she was not alone. But sometimes hope meets a boundary it cannot cross. After days of waiting, doctors confirmed what no one wanted to hear. She would not recover. 2 lives were lost. One night connected them, but the truth was still hidden. That truth began to surface through technology. Security footage, phone data, timestamps that do not lie. Cameras showed the group leaving together, arriving at a residential building. Later, the same vehicle appeared again and again. Slowly, a timeline formed. Investigators returned to the place where the night ended. Outside, they noticed a vehicle that matched hospital reports. It was no longer coincidence. Inside the apartment, physical answers were limited, but digital evidence filled the gaps. Messages sent, messages unanswered. A clear moment when both women wanted to leave. That detail mattered, because intent tells a story, and wanting to go means they understood something was wrong. Witness accounts added another layer. Sounds were heard. Hours passed. No calls were made. Sometimes the most painful question is the simplest one. Why didn't anyone help? As detectives worked, families faced a new reality. Grief mixed with determination. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. This was no longer about a night out. It was about patterns, about behavior that did not begin or end with these two women. And as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something unsettling. This was not the first time concerns had followed the same individual. The past had been quietly waiting to be noticed. Signs existed long before this night. Why were they overlooked? And how many chances were missed to stop what came next? Warnings does it take before someone is truly seen? Why do patterns become clear only after loss? And what happens when the past finally catches up? As investigators reviewed the timeline, attention shifted from the night itself to the people involved. One man stood out, not because of what he said that night, but because of what followed him for years. At first glance, he appeared ordinary, confident, well-spoken, someone who seemed to belong in social spaces without question. That appearance had worked before. But records tell quieter stories, stories that often go unnoticed. As news of the case spread, women began coming forward, not all at once, slowly, carefully, each with hesitation. They described similar encounters, friendly introductions, private spaces, a sudden loss of control they could not explain, and confusion when they tried to understand what had happened. Individually, their stories once seemed isolated, easy to doubt, easy to dismiss. Together, they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Several women said they had trusted him because others did, because he appeared connected, because he spoke with authority and confidence. Trust, again, became the common thread. Some had tried to warn others years earlier. They shared experiences online. They told friends. A few even went to authorities. But without physical proof, their words carried limited weight. Cases stalled, complaints faded into paperwork, life moved on. For the man at the center of it all, nothing changed. He remained free. He returned to the same social environments, the same methods, the same access. Investigators now saw the full picture. This was not a sudden mistake. It was a repeated behavior. Digital evidence strengthened the case. Phone locations, messages, surveillance footage showing careful movements, disguises, different destinations. None of it suggested confusion or panic. It suggested planning. That realization shifted the investigation. Prosecutors understood the challenge ahead. There were no clear physical traces left behind, but there was history, and history speaks loudly when given a voice. Survivors agreed to testify, not because it was easy, but because silence had already cost too much. Their words described the same emotional arc: trust, discomfort, fear, and lasting impact. Experts explained how certain substances can remove awareness without immediate signs, how victims may not even realize what is happening until much later. This helped explain why so many experiences sounded alike. For families, this knowledge brought mixed emotions, validation, but also anger. If these stories had been taken seriously before, could this night have ended differently? That question hung over every meeting, every interview, every court document. Arrests followed, but justice moved slowly. Charges came in stages. Some individuals were released while investigations continued. To outsiders, it looked incomplete. To families, it felt unbearable. Still, they stayed present. They attended hearings. They listened to every detail. They refused to let the system forget. Because this case was no longer just about loss. It was about accountability and about recognizing danger before it becomes irreversible. The trial ahead would bring everything together: the past, the night, and the voices that were once ignored. Would the full truth be enough? And would it arrive in time to mean something more than closure? What does justice look like after trust is broken? Can answers ever feel complete? And how does a courtroom carry the weight of so many voices? When the case finally moved forward, it did not arrive quietly. It came with years of unanswered questions, with grief that had settled deep, and with families who had learned to live in waiting. The courtroom became the place where everything converged, not just one night, but many moments spread across time. Prosecutors presented the story carefully, step by step. They avoided drama, they relied on sequence. Screens showed timestamps, locations, short messages that revealed intent. Two friends wanting to leave, two friends trying to protect each other. Experts explained reactions in calm language, how awareness can fade, how confusion can follow, how danger does not always announce itself. Then the survivors spoke. Their voices were steady, though the memories were not. They described similar experiences, the same confidence, the same setting, the same sudden loss of control. Each account filled a gap. What once looked like coincidence now looked deliberate. The defense offered another explanation. They spoke of shared responsibility, of unpredictable outcomes, of a broader problem affecting many people. But jurors were asked to focus on behavior, on choices made after concern was clear, on actions taken when help was needed. Surveillance footage played a quiet but powerful role. Careful movements, separate locations, decisions that suggested awareness, not confusion. Sometimes what people do after a crisis tells more than what happens during it. Families watched closely. They did not interrupt. They did not react outwardly. But every detail mattered. Days passed. Arguments ended. The room grew still. When the verdict came, it was firm. Accountability was established. A long pattern had finally been acknowledged. The sentence reflected the scope of harm, not just for two women, but for many others whose stories were nearly lost. Relief did not arrive all at once. Justice rarely does. There was still another case pending, another outcome yet to be decided. The process was not finished, but something had shifted. For families, this moment was not about celebration. It was about recognition, about the truth being spoken out loud. They continued to show up because presence mattered, because memory mattered. Outside the courtroom, life moved on. Inside, a message remained clear. Patterns ignored can grow. Silence can protect the wrong person. And trust, once broken, demands responsibility. This case became a warning. Not loud, not dramatic, but lasting. Rehook remained. How do families carry forward when justice arrives, but the loss never leaves? What happens when the courtroom empties? Where does grief go when justice is spoken? And how do families move forward when life cannot return to what it was? When the trial ended, there was no clear sense of closure, only a pause. A moment where the noise stopped, but the pain remained. For the families, daily life continued in unfamiliar ways. Rooms felt quieter. Memories surfaced without warning. Simple routines carried reminders of what was missing. One family chose to honor their daughter through the places she loved. Quiet walks, open spaces, moments where her laughter once lived. They spoke of her curiosity, her kindness, her plans for the future. The other family focused on preserving connection. They kept her belongings close. Small objects that held meaning. Photos, notes, pieces of a life that still felt present. Both families shared something important. They refused to let the story end with loss alone. They began speaking publicly, not out of anger, but out of responsibility. They talked about trust, about how easily confidence can be mistaken for safety, about the importance of staying connected in social spaces. Their message was calm but clear. Stay aware. Stay together. Ask questions. They encouraged people to check in with friends, to leave together, to speak up early when something feels wrong. Advocacy became a form of healing, a way to give meaning to what could not be undone. Investigators echoed that message. They spoke about patterns, about listening when concerns repeat, about taking reports seriously before harm escalates. This case changed procedures. It influenced how similar situations were reviewed. Not overnight, but gradually. For survivors who had come forward, the verdict brought relief. Their voices had been heard, their experiences acknowledged. Still, healing was not immediate. Speaking the truth does not erase the past, but it can loosen its grip. The story also reached people far beyond the families. Viewers, listeners, Those who saw parts of their own lives reflected back, it raised quiet questions about who we trust, about when we hesitate, about how often warning signs are dismissed. The lesson was not fear, it was awareness. Because danger does not always appear as danger. Sometimes it looks familiar, sometimes it feels comfortable, and sometimes recognizing that truth early is what saves lives. Reach the wider world, one final question remained. What responsibility do we all carry in preventing the next night from ending the same way? How do stories like this change the way we move through the world? What stays with us after the details fade? And can awareness truly prevent loss? Long after the case faded from headlines, its impact continued quietly, not through fear, but through reflection. People began revisiting ordinary moments, a night out, a new introduction, a decision made without much thought. This story reminded many that safety is often built in small choices, staying with trusted people, checking in with one another, leaving when something feels off, even if it feels awkward. Experts emphasized that intuition matters, that discomfort is not rudeness, that asking questions is not overreacting. They also spoke about responsibility beyond individuals, venues, security teams, communities. Creating safer spaces is not about limiting freedom. It is about protecting it. The case highlighted how patterns can hide in plain sight. When warnings are scattered, when voices are isolated, when concerns are treated as exceptions instead of signals. Change often begins when connections are made. Families continued their advocacy. They supported organizations focused on prevention and education. They spoke to young adults about awareness, not fear. Their message stayed consistent. Trust yourself. Look out for each other. Speak up sooner rather than later. Law enforcement also reflected. Training improved. Review processes evolved. The goal became earlier intervention. Progress was not perfect, but it was intentional. For the public, this story became more than a case. It became a reminder that danger rarely announces itself, that confidence is not proof of character, that safety is shared, and most importantly, that listening matters. Listening when someone says they are uncomfortable. Listening when concerns repeat. Listening before silence becomes permanent. This story does not end with fear. It ends with awareness. Because while trust connects us, awareness protects us. And remembering that balance may be the most important lesson of all. After, we return to the question that started everything. How do we honor lives lost by changing what happens next? How do we remember without reliving the pain? How do we honor lives without reducing them to a single night? And how do stories like this guide the future instead of haunting it? With time, the focus slowly shifted, away from courtrooms and evidence, toward the people who were lost. Friends remembered laughter, inside jokes, long conversations about plans that never felt rushed. Both women were known for their warmth, for showing up, for caring deeply about the people around them. They were more than a headline, more than a case file. They were daughters, friends, dreamers. Families worked to protect that truth. They spoke about who their loved ones were, not just how they were lost. They shared stories that reflected life, not tragedy. In doing so, they reclaimed the narrative. Memorials were held quietly, not as public events, but as personal moments of connection. Moments where grief and gratitude existed together. For many who followed the case, something changed. Conversations became more open. People checked on each other more often. Plans included safety in ways they hadn't before. That shift mattered, because prevention is not dramatic. It is subtle. It happens in choices we barely notice. Leaving together, sending a quick message, trusting instinct without needing proof. Educators and advocates began using the case as a teaching tool, not to shock, but to inform. They spoke about recognizing patterns, about supporting those who come forward, about how early action can interrupt harm. Survivors who had once stayed silent found strength in community. Their experiences were no longer isolated. They were understood, and understanding created momentum. This story became part of a larger conversation about accountability, about belief, about how systems respond to warning signs. It reminded us that harm often continues when it is ignored and stops when it is recognized. Remembering then became an act of responsibility, not just honoring the past, but protecting the future. Rehook, as we reach the final chapter, one question remains. What does it truly mean to change after listening to a story like this? What does it mean to truly hear a warning? When a story stays with us, what are we meant to do next? And how do we turn awareness into action? Stories like this often end quietly, not with resolution, but with reflection. After everything was said and done, the case became a marker in time, a moment people returned to when thinking about trust and safety, not because it was shocking, but because it felt close to home. It reminded many that danger does not always come from obvious places. Sometimes it arrives through familiarity, through confidence, through moments that feel ordinary. Listening, in this context, means more than hearing details. It means noticing patterns. It means believing concerns before proof feels complete. It means acting while there is still time. Families hope that is what people take forward. Not fear, not suspicion, but awareness paired with compassion. They speak about staying connected, about having plans to leave together, about checking in even when nothing seems wrong. Simple actions, powerful impact. This story also challenges systems. It asks institutions to respond sooner, to connect information, to treat repeated concerns as signals, not coincidences. Change does not always arrive loudly. Often, it comes through listening more carefully than before. For those who followed this case, the takeaway is clear. Trust should never replace awareness, and silence should never outweigh concern. The women at the center of this story cannot be brought back, but their impact continues, in conversations, in choices, in moments when someone decides to leave early, or speak up, or check on a friend. That is how stories like this matter, not because of how they ended, but because of what they change. If awareness can prevent even one night from ending the same way, then listening was never passive. It was a responsibility we all share.